I think that we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone to this Oregon Trails Funding webinar. This is brought to you by the Oregon Trails Coalition with support from Travel Oregon. So big thanks to Travel Oregon and to all of our presenters today. The other group that I wanted to acknowledge, in addition to those folks presenting on the call today, is just all of our federal agency partners who might be on the line today, and just express our gratitude that you're back to work and our gratitude for your work managing our federal lands. We were really missing you these last month and more. So welcome to everybody. We'll get rolling pretty quickly right away here. Just want to let folks know that some of these grant programs that our panelists are going to talk to are definitely geared towards different kinds of trails and different kinds of settings. So I'm sure you'll hear about some programs that might not apply to you or your organization or agency, and some that do. So please bear with us. There are a pretty broad range of options that you'll hear about today. And to get us started, I'm gonna pass the mic and the screen share over to Jody Belfi with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department.
Great, thank you, Steph. It looks like, I think you'll have to stop sharing your screen. There we go. Okay. All right, you can see me and hear me, Steph?
Yes, looks good, Jody.
Okay, good. Great, thank you. And a big thanks to you, Steph, and the Oregon Trails Coalition for hosting this, and the Trails Summit, and all the other awesome work you've been doing. And also I'll echo you, and just a big thank you to our federal workers, and I hope you're all slowly and settling back into your work. It's good to have you back around. It's been very quiet without you all at work. So I'm the coordinator for the Rec Trails program here at Oregon State Parks, and I will be going over a few of our programs that we administer here. So OPRD has 5 different recreational trails, or 5 recreation grant programs. At the web page at the bottom of your screen, if you go there, you can find links about all these programs and contact information and our different grant manuals. So I work specifically with RTP, and I'll briefly go over 3 other programs that we have here that have some relation to trails. And I'll do my best to answer questions about those other 3 programs, but you may just want to get directly in touch with those grant coordinators with your questions. And the one program I won't talk about today is the County Opportunity Grant Program that awards grants for county-operated RV parks. So RTP, or the Rec Trails program, is a federally funded program with a portion of your gas tax, and overseen by the Federal Highway Administration. Grants are awarded to expand and improve public recreational trails for both non-motorized and motorized use, including water trails. Annually, Oregon receives about $1.6 million, and by law, we set aside 30% for motorized trails, so for OHVs and snowmobiles. A more recent question that keeps coming up is about whether or not you can apply for motorized funding if you allow e-bikes on your trails. And the answer to that is no, you have to allow other types of OHVs on that trail. Just having e-bikes on a hiker-biker trail doesn't automatically qualify for motorized funding, and that was clarified on the federal level. And we typically have carryover funds added to our annual grant cycle, so you'll see that 1.6 number go up closer to the grant cycle with some other funding we've been de-obligating from any projects that close under budget. As far as what's eligible under RTP, new trail construction is eligible. We don't fund maintenance, but you can apply for restoration projects. Examples include restoring trails impacted by wildfire, replacing bridges, trail reroutes, replacing trails or other facilities beyond their useful life, and more. Trailhead amenities and improvements are eligible under RTP. Water trails are an eligible trail type, and for those we typically fund bathrooms, staging areas, and accessible docks. Land or easement acquisitions are eligible for trail development purposes. Federal acquisition requirements do apply, so we recommend you contact us early about those requirements. Then we can use up to 5% of our annual funds for safety and education projects related to trail use. user safety, or environmental protection. And then another 5% of funds may be used for projects to assess a trail system for accessibility or maintenance. Lastly, equipment purchases are technically eligible under RTP, but for the most part, that's not possible right now due to Buy America laws. And those laws require that when projects include steel over $2,500 or more, the steel must be certified as U.S. sourced and final assembly must take place in the U.S. And historically, Federal Highways has issued waivers since that is not realistic or feasible when it comes to certifying every part in a piece of equipment. So no waivers are being issued under the current White House administration. So we only know of one snow groomer out there that meets those requirements. So it's technically eligible, but right now not in a practical way. And then there's a lot more details about eligibility of these categories and specific expenses within them if you go to our online grant manual, and I'll be making some updates to that before the upcoming grant cycle. As far as who is eligible, that includes local units of government, state agencies, federal agencies, park districts, and tribes. Nonprofits can also qualify if you've been a registered 501c3 for at least 3 years. We have a few nonprofits who manage public recreation areas, but for the most part, these are partner groups applying on behalf of a public land manager. And you should be working very closely with that land manager and have their approval if you are planning to apply. And if you're trying to decide whether the land manager or partner group should apply for your project, you can contact me and discuss some of the nuance or other factors to take into consideration there. So this is a quick funding overview, and again, there's lots more details in the manual about this. RTP requires a 20% match. New this year is that we are requiring a 40% match if your grant request is $250,000 or more. And match can be a combination of in-kind funding, other grants and donations, and volunteer labor can also be used and is currently valued at $24.89 an hour. Federal guidance does require that at least 5% of your project is funded by non-federal funds, and that's especially important if you're using other federal grant funds or as match, or if you are a federal agency applying for RTP. And we just learned about an exception to this rule if you're using federal funds for certain youth corps. So I'll be putting more information about that out at our grant workshops this year and in the manual. And there is a $10,000 grant minimum and no maximum. In recent cycles, the average grant per year has fallen within $65,000 to $125,000. I think it's only 2 grants or so above that $300,000 number, so those are somewhat of an anomaly. And federal guidance also requires that no more than 15% of your total project cost, including match, are used for final planning and engineering. So your project should be pretty far along in the design phase, but we can pay for some of those final engineering costs. And then if you receive a grant, you have 2 years to complete the project. As far as how projects are selected, RTP is competitive, especially in the non-motorized category. In the last few cycles, we've approved about 30 to 50% of the non-motorized project proposed under RTP. And then after we at OPRD review your application, the applications are given over to our RTP advisory committee members. They score and rank projects using criteria from the 2016 statewide trails plan, and additionally some new data from the newest statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, or SCORP, that is in draft form right now, and we're accepting public comments through tomorrow on that, the new SCORP data. And so we're making a few minor tweaks to the RTP criteria, and you'll see that by the beginning of April. Applicants are required to present to the committee if you're requesting $50,000 or more. After final presentations to the committee, they rank and vote on their recommendations and then give them to the OPRD Commission for approval. Then we work with Federal Highways to get their approval and funding in place. So if you were approved, you receive funding, or actually I'll go over that on the next slide about the timeline for when you'll receive money. But as far as the committee, they're made up primarily of user representatives who also represent other sectors of the recreation community. So this year, here's our cycle for this year. So we'll be opening for application on April 1st, and I'll be scheduling a grant workshop in Salem and an online webinar sometime in late March or early April, so you can keep an eye on our website for those dates. We do require you submit a letter of intent on our grant site if you are planning to apply. and those will be due by April 30th, and that's just a simple online web form that you submit. So you do that through our online website. So if you go to that grants page, if you don't already have an account, you can register for one, but you can't actually see anything or start doing anything until April 1st. But I will be putting a list of our revised application questions on the website by that date. Applications are due June 15th. The committee meets for the grant meeting and presentations October 22nd through 24th of this year. Then the commission will review their recommendations for approval in November. And then there's a lot of steps we go through with federal highways. So if you are approved for funding, you'd receive notice to proceed in spring of 2020, and again, have 2 years to complete the project. So if you want to talk about your project in advance or get a feel for how competitive it might be, feel free to contact me, and this will go for any of our programs. Contact the grant coordinator, and we're happy to talk through those things. And on the RTP schedule portion of our webpage, you can also find a list of projects that have been funded the past 2 years to kind of get an idea of what's been successful under RTP. So the next program is the Local Government Grant Program, or LGGP. It is a lottery-funded competitive grant program that funds general outdoor recreation projects, including trails. LGGP currently receives $11 million a biennium, and they run an annual grant cycle of about $5.5 million. And so agencies apply either for a large grant, small, or a planning grant. And the majority of funding is allocated under the large category there. And the match requirement for LGGP does vary by population, and if you go to the grant manual, you can see the breakdown of that. And it is a competitive program. I think the last few years they've awarded about 50% of the projects as well, so just keep that in mind when you're applying. So under local government, all types of outdoor recreation projects are eligible and relevant to today. That includes trails, bike facilities, bike parks, and non-motorized boating facilities. And eligible applicants include local units of government and port districts that manage recreation. As far as the planning grants, though, that is limited to smaller communities. So there's the population breakdown on your screen, and you can see that in the manual as well. So local government is currently open for applications, and the due dates vary sometime in April or May, depending on the type or the size of your project. And there's no letter of intent for local government, so you can start your application anytime before that due date. The local government committee meets in June, and projects will be approved by the commission in September. Then notices to proceed will be sent out not long after that. So if you have questions, contact Mark Cowan, who coordinates that program, or if you get in touch with me, I'll connect you. Then Land and Water Conservation Fund, this one is funded through the National Park Service and also awards grants for general outdoor recreation. Oregon receives about $1.5 million annually, but we run a grant cycle every other year for a total of $3 million. And 60% of that is set aside for local governments, and up to 40% is awarded to state agencies. And Land and Water requires a 50% match. And it is less competitive than RTP and local government. I think these last few cycles, they've awarded closer to 60 to 70% of the projects. And local government was modeled after Land and Water as far as eligibility, so the same type of projects are eligible, including trails. And then applicant eligibility include local governments, tribes. Tribes fall under the 60% local set aside, and then state agencies include OPRD, Department of Forestry, Fish and Wildlife, and Department of State Lands. So assuming and hoping that Land and Water funds are reauthorized, they will open their next grant cycle in January 2020. An important thing to know about Land and Water is that once you use Land and Water fund on a project site or park, the boundary of that park or trail must be dedicated to public recreation use in perpetuity or forever. So if any encroachment of that or use of that site for non-recreation purposes requires that the entity make up that amount of land with new public recreation property. So if you want to develop trails with Land and Water, you may want to look at any sites or parks in your within your jurisdiction that have already utilized Land and Water funding, or just give extra consideration to constraining any new property with land and water. So regional trails particularly can get extra complicated, but we just encourage that you contact Michelle Scalise, the grant coordinator for that program, in advance to discuss some of that nuance and the potential impact of the project that you would like to apply for. Lastly, we also administer the ATV Grant Program. It runs a cycle every other year and awards about $9 million for OHV motorized trails. The majority of funds are awarded to agencies for operations and maintenance and law enforcement for OHV riding areas, and then the remaining 10% can be applied to for acquisition, planning, and development. They require a 20% match, and eligible applicants include land managers and nonprofit clubs who operate riding areas or partner with a land manager. So the law enforcement and O&M grants, they already were decided on in late 2018, and they'll open again in 2020. But the 10% other category, they are currently open for applications. The letter of intent was technically already due, but they've been adjusting some dates in response to the shutdown. So if you haven't started your application, you may still be able to. You just want to get a hold of Mike Law or Ian Caldwell as soon as possible to get started on that. So those are our 4 programs that have some relation to trails. Here's my contact information. I know we'll have some time at the end for Q&A, but otherwise feel free to email or call me, and I can connect you to any of those other grant coordinators that I mentioned. So with that.
Thanks so much, Jody.
Yeah.
We're going to next turn it over to Michelle Woodard from Travel Oregon. And I did forget to cover at the beginning of the webinar how we're handling Q&A. So if you can, you should have controls for both a chat box or a Q&A box kind of at the bottom of your Zoom screen as webinar participants or attendees. So you can submit a question via either of those kind of formats. And we've got folks monitoring the chat and Q&A box, and they'll either respond via by typing you an answer, or we'll have an audio Q&A at the end of the webinar. Thanks, and on to you, Michelle.
Okay, thanks, Steph. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. It's the Crater Lake image, correct?
Yes, I keep having to get back off the moon.
Okay,
you're looking great.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Woodard and Grants Manager at Travel Oregon. I'm here to speak with you about Travel Oregon's grant opportunities. So, just as an overview, Travel Oregon is funded through a statewide lodging tax, and currently 10% of the Travel Oregon budget goes into a competitive grants program. So that breaks down to about $3.6 million annually. So let's take a look at the program. Maybe. There we go. Okay. I always like to read this part just to be very specific. So Travel Oregon has established a program to make grant awards to eligible applicants for projects that contribute to the development and improvement of communities throughout the state by means of the enhancement, expansion, and promotion of the visitor industry. So basically, develop, improve, enhance, expand, and promote. That's the focus of these grants. Today I'm going to talk about 2 different programs that we have. I'll start with our competitive small grants program, since we'll be beginning to accept applications for this program in May. This is an annual grant program. So for this program, there can be requests up to $20,000. We don't have a minimum. There is a requirement of 10% cash match. So you can include in-kind services, but we have to have that minimum of at least 10% cash towards this project. Applications open May 20th, and the deadline for applications will be June 19th. We'll have funds awarded by September 12th of 2019. So we do have a fairly quick turnaround in this program from application to award. Project completion needs to be done in a 12-month time frame from that award date. And these projects need to be new in nature. So something about the project needs to be new. So if you're doing trail development, you already have trails that are started. If you're creating a new trail, that would fit. So if there's some sort of a new component, it fits into this grant program. We've opened this program twice in the last year and a half, and we've awarded $750,000 to 52 different projects. We'll have about $500,000 when we open it here in May. The other program that I'll speak to is our medium grants program. So this is a program where you can have requests between $20,000 to $100,000. There's a 25% cash match requirement. So again, a little bit higher in request, as well as a little bit higher cash that's needed for this program. This is a program that's going to run every other year, so every biennium for Travel Oregon. So our next application period will open in spring of 2020. And then we'll award funds prior to August of 2020. So it'll be between the July and August timeframe of 2020 that these funds will be distributed. Projects need to be completed within a 2-year time frame. So here again, it's a larger scale request. We're also giving you a little bit longer to be able to complete this project. We've awarded $850,000 to 12 projects in July of 2018 for this program. And we saw that there was a really high need in funding for some of these larger capital projects. So specifically, if you're looking at building trail, this program may get you there a little bit faster than our small grant program. And I have had people ask in the past, can I apply for a small grant and then receive funding and then come back and apply for a medium grant? Am I eligible to do so? And yes, in fact, you are. So you could apply for both of these programs. You could be awarded in both programs or one or the other. So that does not make a difference. So who can apply for these grants? Well, eligible applicants must be doing business in Oregon. Local government, port districts, tribes, and nonprofit entities are eligible. A lot of destination marketing organizations, whether they're chambers of commerce, visitor and convention bureaus, are some of our key recipients because of their close tie in working to improve economic impacts of tourism. But that said, if you're a trail association or an outdoor rec group and you are a registered nonprofit, then you meet our eligibility requirements. So what types of projects are eligible? Well, we touched on this a little bit in the previous slide, but eligible projects must provide for improvement or expansion of the tourism economy in Oregon. So remember, these are tourism grants. If you want to construct a trail, plan for a trail, or maintain a trail, in your application, you need to describe how this will improve the economy, and in particular, how it's valuable for visitors. The other piece is projects are intended to increase the likelihood of visitation from 50 miles outside of your local area. Please remember this, again, travel and tourism grants. So Travel Oregon considers a visitor to be someone located 50 miles outside of your local area, and projects that are too community focused aren't going to score as highly as those projects that can clearly show a connection to visitation. So here's some project ideas. So if you're thinking trail development, you could apply for planning assistance, construction, signage design or installation, visitor access improvements. Some examples of projects we've funded. When looking at access improvements, we awarded funding to the Applegate Trails Association in Southern Oregon, and this was to pave an access road and a parking lot for the East Applegate Ridge Trailhead. We've awarded construction dollars towards Whiskey Run in Coos County. This is a single track mountain bike trail system. We've had dollars go towards planning assistance for the Pacific City Mountain Bike Trail project. So you can see we've awarded a variety of items for this construction and trail development piece. Other project ideas can stem from marketing, so creating print and digital collateral, such as trail maps. We would award branding projects for a system or network of trails. Or how about thinking about a project geared towards sustainability? We've awarded funding to the Trail Keepers of Oregon, and this was to implement a $1 for Gorge Trails Fund. So basically, this project creates a program that collects $1 through online reservations and resort fees at participating businesses, and then those collected funds go towards priority projects or trail work in the gorge. So think about preserving trails, rebuilding trails. These things fit into our program. I do want to emphasize, it's Travel Oregon's mission to inspire travel that drives economic development, but it's also our mission to ensure the preservation of Oregon's way of life and its natural places. So I know I love Oregon and all the amazing things we can see and do and experience here, and I'm sure the majority of you feel the same way. And trails and outdoor recreation in general are a really good fit for Travel Oregon's grant program. So in the past year and a half, we've awarded about $300,000, which is close to 18% of our budget for small and medium grants to funding trail type projects. So, some additional takeaways. If you aren't already, please sign up for Travel Oregon's industry e-newsletter. So you can find the sign up link on every page of our industry website. You'll see that the grant's web address is above. It's industry.traveloregon.com/grants. We also have additional email updates that we send, including those that focus on outdoor recreation, cycling, destination development. So please consider joining one of those lists as well. And when we post our grant guidelines and we make our funding announcements, we do that through our email list. So it is really valuable to get on that list. Next, if you have a project idea, connect with your regional destination management organization. So I have a web address there. It's industry.traveloregon.com/RDMO. So these are folks that are actively promoting tourism across the state, and please use these tourism experts as a resource. It's actually a requirement for our grant programs is for you to make this connection with these regional experts. If you don't know a lot about them, you will be able to find more information on our website, and learn if what you're considering is already on the docket in their area. They might be thinking of planning something similar in your own community or the surrounding community, and know that these regional representatives often also have potential funding for you as well. So please utilize them as a resource. And then I want to touch just briefly on what makes a project successful in our grant program. One of the key things is including letters of support. So being able to show that the community backs your project is really important. And then if you're able to obtain letters from tourism businesses, whether it's hotels, bike shops, restaurants, anyone that's connected to tourism, and that they can provide you a letter that shows how your project can impact them, that's an added bonus. And then if you're going to build a trail or install signage, please show us construction permitting and designs or land use documents, basically verifying that you can legally make this project happen. So that is important. Sometimes that seems to be forgotten in our grant program, that we don't need, people think we don't need all those details, but we do, and that's going to make you much more successful if you include that information. And really, I'll just close by saying, you know, I'm excited. I think there's close to 100 people on this webinar, and so thank you to those people listening. I hope you see that there's opportunities for funding available, not only through our program, but the other programs that are being presented. So please take advantage of these. And you will see our website again listed above, that industry.traveloregon.com/grants. Please visit that. That's where all of our information lives. Our guidelines will be on that site, as well as a listing that shows those projects that we've funded in the past, and then just timing for when our programs open. And always feel free to reach out to me with any questions. You can reach me at grants@traveloregon.com. And if you have project ideas, please feel free to run those my way. So look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. We've got some good questions coming through the chat and Q&A, so we'll do our best to respond to those either in writing or again at our audio Q&A at the end of the panel. But meanwhile, we have Susan Peithman from Oregon Department of Transportation on deck, hopefully getting set up to share slides and join us with audio. And I'm seeing your slide come through, Susan.
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
And we can hear you great.
Great. Hi, my name is Susan Peithman. I am the Active Transportation Policy Lead at the Oregon Department of Transportation here in Salem. And I'm going to talk to you guys about kind of funding for transportation trails, but also the connections to trails and some of our funding opportunities for that as well. So again, my name is Susan Peithman. I just wanted to highlight a little bit about my job, because I think that Stephanie does a good job with these webinars, helping people understand who they can contact and access and what their jobs are. And I just wanted to say that part of my job is identifying funding and recognizing the deficiencies in funding, and then helping develop the policy behind our funding program. So if you're just I just say this because I encourage you, if you're like, oh, I see this huge hole here, or this program would work better like this, I just encourage you guys to reach out to me, and I'm all ears. So I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we fund and what we don't fund. So we fund state and local trail projects, and I say trail, but really in a lot of ways, people perceive our trails that we fund as multi-use paths. So those are kind of interchangeably used throughout my presentation, but I'll show you a couple examples to make it clearer. The trails also must be ADA accessible and have a transportation and or tourism focus. And we also fund on-road connections too. You'll notice that picture in the upper left as an example of kind of a mid-block crossing for a trail. We don't fund soft surface trails with a recreation focus. That's why you talk to Jody. And we do not fund hiking or mountain biking trails, even though I love them. So top picture, that's the kind of thing we fund. Bottom picture, no. Again, that's Jody. I think that's Silver Falls, and that was the Rec Trails grant. So some of the policy, all of our programmatic and funding decisions are guided by policy. We have an adopted policy with the bicycle and pedestrian plan with a focus on off-road walkways and bikeways that help connect communities and provide alternatives to motorized travel or promote and support walking and biking tourism. So that's kind of our guiding policy around how we're funding our trails. Like everyone, we have restrictive pots, but we have a combination of federal programs. We have our State Highway Trust Fund, and we also have things like lottery and the bike tax dollars, and that's kind of our bike ped funding. I mention this because we can pay for different things with different sources. The State Highway Trust Fund is probably our greatest pot, and you can pay for trails or paths that are actually inside the road right-of-way. Gas tax dollars are restricted to inside the road right-of-way, and so that can pay for things like parallel paths and crossings. We do have some federal dollars with our transportation alternatives dollars, and those can be used for projects inside or outside the road right-of-way, but they're probably best for high-cost projects. So this is an example of the Minto-Brown Bridge in Salem. That was our transportation enhancements dollars. That was kind of the pre-program before transportation alternatives. And federal dollars can be very complicated to use and at a pretty high cost, so it's better to kind of combine those together for some of the big projects. We also have lottery and bike tax dollars, and those must be used for outside the road right-of-way. They're easier to deliver, but they're limited by some statute requirements, including connections to employment and things like that. This is just for your guys' reference later. We tend to change the name of our programs pretty consistently, and so these are some of our previous programs: our state bike ped grants, our transportation enhancements, our Connect Oregon, and our STIP Enhanced grants. So if you've worked with ODOT before, you could be familiar with these, and so I'm just going to show you basically the evolution of some of these programs. We fund things both on the state system, but we also have competitions. So again, the state system priorities is just for reference later, but I wanted to highlight our competitions. We do have a pass-through of a lot of our money that we get from the feds that go to the MPOs. So this is just to highlight that some of your MPOs have competitions that are available for trails also, such as the Transportation Alternatives Program gets distributed to, like, for example, Metro, and Metro has a Regional Flex Fund program that also pays for a lot of trails. We are the fiscal pass-through for the rec trails, and then there's also a fund called Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality that also goes to the MPOs that can be used for trails as well. The ones I'm going to talk about here are the competitions that we send out are our Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure, our Safe Routes to School infrastructure, and our off-system bike ped / Connect Oregon. So I just hit Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure because it's a really good program that can be used for education, and kids use trails a lot. And so while there's not a clear overlap with trails, I'd just like to highlight that we have a competition for education and encouragement, and kids love trails. I love kids on trails. We have a competition for Safe Routes to School infrastructure, and this was something that was passed with House Bill 2017 legislative session, and it's $10 million annually, increasing to $15 million. It is state gas tax dollars, which means it's restricted to the road right-of-way, and it has to be used within a mile of an elementary school, but it is excellent for crossing improvements. So if you have a number of Washington County is a perfect example of this. They have a significant number of trails that are kind of mid-block, and they need a lot of crossing improvements and mid-block crossing improvements. That's something that Safe Routes to School money can be used for. And the project manager for that is Leanne Ferguson. We just approved the latest funding round. However, I said it's annual, and so we're kind of distributing it in 2-year blocks. And so the next competition will be open for the next competition probably in the next year or so. Connect Oregon is another, let me check my time. Okay, plenty of time. Connect Oregon is our other grants program. It also had some big changes in the in the 2017 legislative session, and so we're in the process of kind of figuring out all of the pieces of that program, but there's a 7% set aside in that Connect Oregon fund specifically for off-system trail projects. There's also another funding source in there, 2 other funding sources in there. That's where a vehicle privilege tax. So if you pay, if you buy a new car, you pay half a percentage, and if you buy a new bike, you pay $15 on that bike tax, and that goes into this fund as well. That has a 30% match requirement on it, and it is for projects only for projects that expand and improve commuter routes, going back to that regional path designation. We're in our rulemaking right now. That's a really boring way to say that we're clarifying the legislation, and we have a number of stakeholders around the table, including Steph Knoll, representing the Oregon Trails Coalition. So if you have any comments around Connect Oregon that are not appropriate for me, you can always talk to her. We're also putting together an off-system bike PED fund. So we're pulling a number of funding sources together to do some sort of PATH program with some of our federal dollars as well. And so this is just an FYI. This program is in development. You should be hearing, I've been talking about it for a while, but we're getting closer to the launching it, which is we'll be doing competition for local agencies with multiple funding sources, probably the Connect Oregon Fund. We've got $6 million set aside for the in a funding pot for 21 to 24, plus another couple sets of dollars. And so we're looking to have, you know, a substantial pot to pay for an off-street paths program there. These are just some of the steps that we're going through right now. And this is a I circled this 2019 timeline because that's when we intend to be able to send it out to the public and say, here are dates for when this will be opening and exactly what the program will look like. I did want to highlight, don't want to forget about, Jody already talked about RTP, but we don't want to forget about FLAP. You'll see the big picture of the Historic Columbia River Highway down below. That is a great example of a lot of a project of statewide significance that received a significant amount of federal funding as well. And the federal funding, FLAP, is the Federal Land Access Program. It's already closed for this year, but we get a really, really big chunk of money, Oregon does, for it. And the access to federal lands piece has been very critical for helping build some trails, including a couple of big chunks of the Historic Columbia River Highway. All right, so that's all I've got. I'm under time. Stephanie, brought you guys some questions.
Well done, Susan. I don't see any questions already popping up for the panel. So let's give folks a minute to kind of think those and type those out and go ahead and move on to Dan. And then we'll do a broad Q&A at the end. And I'll have a little bit more information as well to share about the Federal Lands Access Program, but for folks watching that, there's not info posted yet about the next round yet, other than tentatively there should be information out in or a new application process would begin in the early part of 2020. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's the next assumed timeline for the Federal Lands Access Program. And Dan, we've got your slides. Do you want to test your audio?
Great, Steph, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Again, my name is Dan Miller, and I work for a technical assistance program of the National Park Service called Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance. The National Park Service is in your community, and it's been for a long time. I would wager that your favorite park has been funded through either LWCF or UPAR, maybe one of your favorite historical buildings that you have visited has been funded through the National Park Service. The National Park Service isn't just those iconic landmark parks like Oregon Caves or Crater Lake or Mount Rainier, but it's also a bunch of programs such as these listed here that provide funding and assistance to local recreation, historical, cultural resources efforts. I'm going to talk again about the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. This program is quite a bit different than the other programs that you've heard about, which are all excellent sources of funding for your trail projects. RTCA does not fund trail projects. What we do is provide technical assistance, that's planning assistance, to help you develop your project, to get a conceptual plan, to understand what it is that you want to do with your partners, with your landowners, so that you can then take that and go and get funding. So RTCA, or Rivers and Trails, works with local and state governments, community groups, coalitions, nonprofits. We work on river-oriented projects, park and open space projects, and trail and greenway type projects. We don't come into your community and generate a project. We respond to requests for assistance. Those requests for assistance are like a grant in that you're applying for our planning time. We work on locally led, locally driven projects, and we provide project management expertise, planning and design expertise. We work with the applicant, or who we refer to as the primary cooperator, and a planning team that can be made up of local community citizens, a coalition of government agencies and nonprofits, whoever the stakeholders are, to be able to come together and collectively make decisions to plan your project. We work collaboratively and we're consensus driven. And all of our projects have a heavy emphasis on public involvement, in that we can help you plan out open houses, workshops, do online surveys, so that you're able to bring in what folks want in the community into your trail project. I work in Oregon. I'm based out of Portland, but we have RTCA employees all over the 50 states and U.S. protectorates. The next closest office is in Seattle and San Francisco. Here's a few examples of some of the projects in the last few years that we've worked on in Oregon. A number of water trails, Willamette, Deschutes, Tillamook area water trails. I put in some park projects here to show as an example. We've worked on a number of trail system projects, both motorized and non-motorized. And we work all over the state of Oregon, urban, suburban, and rural. So in order to get RTCA assistance, like I said, you need to put in an application. And applications are due every year at the end of June. A good application has to be clear and concise, and also realistic in that it's actually achievable. It has to have elements of outdoor recreation and or natural resource management. The lands have to be publicly owned, or you have to have written permission by landowners. We will work on private timberland and other private landowners if those private landowners acknowledge that they're okay with RTCA planning on their land. And then we like to see 3 or more letters of commitment And what we mean by commitment is more than a letter of support, in that it says that this entity or person or group or agency is not only in support of the application, but is also willing to attend any planning meetings to be part of the process. And then ideally, prior to applications in June, would be you want to reach out to your local RTCA staff person. And again, in this case, it's me. Prior, I can help you determine whether this is a good project or not. And I'm more than happy to help you work through iterations of your RTCA application. So if you're interested in the program, or you know anybody who might be interested in the program, I recommend that you go to our website at nps.gov/RTCA. You can download an application there. You can view the most recent projects that we've worked on, not only in the state of Oregon, but all over the region and country. I've got my email up here, dan_miller@nps.gov. Feel free to fire away any questions that you might have, or send any potential projects that you might have. And again, applications are due before June 30th. So that's it for my presentation. And again, I want to just underscore the fact that we're not a funding program. We provide technical assistance, planning assistance for your trail and park effort.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. I'm glad to have you back.
It's good to be back.
This is Steph Knoll with the Oregon Trails Coalition, and I'm just going to give a quick overview of a few more opportunities that are out there that we as a coalition have no direct role in managing, but wanted to touch on in this webinar. And Susan mentioned the Federal Lands Access Program, and again, these are our larger grants, and it's less the trail type that's relevant for these, so much as the fact that the trail has to do with providing access to federal lands, and they're large grants with a minimum grant of $100,000. So if that is of interest, now this year is a good time to be talking with federal agency partners, or if you are the federal agency, with other partners about that next call for projects that we would expect to see in January 2020. And next, I wanted to, here's the other one I wanted to cover real quick. Some folks have asked about planning and engineering dollars specifically. One source specifically for planning grants, though not for kind of design and engineering work, is the Transportation Growth Management Program, which has a mission of helping local jurisdictions plan for streets. Oops, sorry about the slide change there. That has helping lead to sustainable, livable communities, and with increased opportunities for transit, walking, and bicycling. So for especially folks who are looking to embark on a big planning effort for either a significant kind of multi-use trail, or kind of do trail system planning, especially for trails that have a kind of transportation function as well as a recreation funding function, that is a good program to look at specifically for planning dollars. And those applications will be available in April, due mid-June, and eligible applicants are cities, counties, councils of governments, tribal governments, and also special districts like park districts or transit districts. And then other programs to explore, and all of these are a little bit different, but just for folks who are looking both for infrastructure dollars or for programs dollars, some different places to look are one, your metropolitan planning organization, soil and water conservation district or parks district may have grant funds available. And again, those might be infrastructure funds or program funds. For those in the Portland metro area, there's a Nature and Neighborhoods grant cycle that specifically funds community nonprofits working to increase access to open space. So if you're looking for program dollars, you might look either to local programs or to the private industry. So a lot of the outdoor industry partners have their own grant programs. So the REI, Keen Effect, Patagonia, North Face Explore Fund, People for Bikes all have grant programs. And so, you know, go ahead and you can research those directly. People for Bikes specifically has one, I think, cycle closing now, but another cycle opening probably again later this year. So that's one to look at for folks who are looking at bike trails, you know, and both kind of mountain bike experience trails are eligible, as well as kind of the paved or transportation side of things. And also kind of just closing now for 2019, but we'll expect to see it available again in 2020 is the Rails to Trails Conservancy Doppelt Family Trail Development Fund. And those are relatively small grants, but there's a lot of different kind of land managers and organizations are eligible to build and improve multi-use trails is another big one too. So those are some other things to explore as you're looking to put the pieces together for trails funding. And I want to thank again all of our presenters, and we will kind of open it up for some general question and answer, and I'll invite all of our panelists to make sure that you're unmuted for this portion. But we did have one question I wanted to start with about a question about I'm finding it again, about specifically engineering or detailed design. And I read that question as kind of that piece that stands in between planning and actual construction. And I'm wondering if any panelists can speak to what resources are available kind of specifically for engineering and design phases of projects.
This is
Jody. I can start and just say that we don't have funding dedicated for standalone planning and design or engineering projects. The local government does have that small set aside for small communities to access funding, so that's one option. But otherwise, within our programs, generally up to 15% of your budget can be for planning and design. So you can use that as match if you've done some final engineering or have the grant pay for final engineering. But that's just as far as our programs go.
This is Michelle at Travel Oregon. We do fund planning and design. I think there has to be a kind of a clear end goal. And so again, it's tying this to visitation and tourism and making these longer term economic impacts. But something for planning and design is definitely eligible in our program.
And then Stephanie, this is Susan. Planning and design can get rolled up into the total project, but we need to have a project built as the outcome. However, the TGM grants that you described have been really effective at doing trail master planning and like active transportation planning for communities.
Right. So it sounds like engineering, I think the way to look at engineering and design is it can often be part of a cost for a grant that also includes or a project that also includes the construction of it, or there's kind of separate sources to look at specifically for the planning phase. we have a question about opportunities for development of web and database applications. And I'm guessing that this relates to kind of resources for either agencies to manage trails or for trail users, kind of, if that, I'm curious if that's mapping applications or stuff. This question's from Ed Wilson. So without more clarification, I'm not exactly sure what the application in mind is, but perhaps, Michelle, you could speak to, have there been any Travel Oregon grants to date that have supported kind of digital resources to go along with trails and tourism?
We haven't seen that. We don't allow apps. So if this is speaking specifically to creating an app or something that someone's going to be able to access mobilely, we do not allow app development for our grant program, just because technology changes so quickly. That just wasn't a wise investment for us. But I mean, if it was something where you're looking at maybe, you know, GPS coordinates or some other way of mapping, I think that would be a conversation that we could definitely, we could talk more about. We haven't seen it, like I said, but I don't think there's anything that really rules that out, but definitely that mobile apps do not qualify at Travel Oregon.
Thanks. We have a question from Rodney Sell about, does ODOT funding have to be a trail project on ODOT right-of-way? Which I'll pitch to Susan, and I think the answer is going to be depends on the grant program.
Yeah, exactly. No, we'll pay for things within our right-of-way. However, something outside on a local agency road would need to come through our competitive grant program, the one that I was mentioning that's in development, or if you're looking for on-road connections on local roads, that would be like something like the Safe Routes to School program. We do have examples where local agencies have delivered projects on state roadways as well, and that's a little bit more complicated, and if that's what you're looking for, we can talk about that later.
Thank you. So if all goes well with how I think we've recorded this webinar, we do hope to be able to share it on the blog at OregonTrailsCoalition.org. I also just wanted to share a couple of upcoming opportunities with everyone here. One is I wanted to remind folks that currently our state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan update is open for public comment through February 7th. And there's a whole chapter in that SCORP plan, it's called, so you can look up SCORP, Oregon Recreation, you'll find it online. There's a whole chapter on the need for more non-motorized trail funding specifically in the state. So invite folks to take a look at that, and particularly that chapter 9 of the SCORP, to see if you see your kind of community's trail priority projects kind of reflected there and its approach. Again, public comments open till February 7th. And secondly, the Oregon Trails Coalition is partnering with another coalition called Oregon Outdoors to host the Outdoor Recreation Day at the Capitol on February 12th. That we invite folks who are able to come join us in Salem to talk to legislators, and our whole platform will be around the need to increase trails funding in Oregon and preserve trails funding in Oregon. I know we also got another question specifically about the transportation, the recent transportation bill and local government grant program funding, which I think Jody offered to respond to, and I'm also happy to respond to that, Quinn, offline. But I want to respect folks' time and go ahead and wrap up the webinar, and again invite folks to get in touch with the Oregon Trails Coalition with other questions, suggestions for future webinars, or if we can help you follow up with any questions, we're happy to facilitate that too. And again, one more thank you to Travel Oregon, who has provided support in getting this set up and provided the use of this webinar platform for us to share this information. So thank you, presenters, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.